Welcome to the What I Wish I Knew After Pregnancy Loss podcast. I am your host, Shana Southern. I am an angel mum, a rainbow mum, a pregnancy loss practitioner, and trauma-informed coach. I created the Institute of Healing Through Pregnancy Loss out of my own experience with loss in the hopes to provide understanding and healing, educating people on pregnancy loss, and creating more women or men in trained support roles. In this podcast, I hope to shed light on what I wish I knew in relation to pregnancy loss, opening up the conversation, breaking the stigma, and bringing real-life stories plus guest experts. Thank you for being here with me today, and let's dive into today's episode. Welcome to the podcast, the intersection of pregnancy loss, fertility, trauma, and purpose, having the conversations that should have been happening all along. Today, I have with me Jules Dwyer. Jules is a hypnotherapist and rapid transformational therapy practitioner who supports women navigating fertility challenges and pregnancy loss. After 5 years of IVF and pregnancy loss, Jules found her way to motherhood. That journey shaped both her personal healing and the work she offers today. Now a mum to 2 boys, she works with subconscious reprogramming, somatic tools, and coaching to help women move out of fear, perfectionism, and control into calm, trust, and connection. Her work supports women to feel grounded and emotionally supported as they move forward on their path to motherhood. Thank you for joining us, Jules.
Thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. I'm excited to dive into a few of the things that we've spoken about just prior to jumping on. But I guess, do you want to share your story and what has led you to what you do and where you are today?
Yeah, sure. My husband and I met a bit later in life, in the mid to late 30s. And as you do when you start in a relationship, you just assume, you start talking about when you're going to have babies. And you just assumed it was going to be fine. And about a month or two before we got married, we actually found out we'd have to do IVF because of my husband's fertility. So soon after our wedding, we went into IVF thinking that the first cycle was going to work. And what that turned into was a very long 5-year journey of IVF. And in that 5 years, we did 13 full cycles of IVF. And we did 2 IUI cycles. And in that time, I had 3 early pregnancy losses. And in that space, there was a lot of grieving going on because it was male and female factor fertility. And it slowly became apparent that my egg quality was becoming an issue, despite me doing everything I possibly could, as you do on this journey, to do whatever I could to make sure that my quality was great. So after we had the very last cycle we did with our own eggs of IVF ended in a miscarriage, and which was heartbreaking because I knew that was going to be our last cycle. And we then decided to move to donor egg conception, and we were incredibly lucky to find a donor relatively quickly and did a cycle with her really quickly. And soon after that, I was pregnant with my first son, and who's now 3. And I now have another son, Darcy, who's 1, who's also conceived through egg donation.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's such a layered journey, isn't it? You look onto people and you're like, oh, she's got 2 healthy young boys, but the journey that you take to get there and the mental and the emotional and the physical toll that it takes on you to get there, it's heartbreaking. And especially when we think heading into, having children, even before we find our partners, we're like, it's going to be easy. It's just we're going to have sex and it's going to work. And then when it doesn't, there's a lot of guilt and shame and blame that we can put on ourselves for our body's not doing the thing that it's designed to do. How did you support yourself through the losses, potentially, even because we went through 5 years of trying to conceive and ended up at the fertility clinics because just like, why is it not happening? But in that
Mm.
time, there was beliefs about myself that I had already created,
Yeah.
that maybe motherhood wasn't for me, that my body was failing, that of course it's not going to do the thing that it's meant to do, because I had all of these self-worth and self-esteem issues
Yeah.
growing up.
Yeah.
So it was just feeding into all of that. And there's not much support for that when we're going through that. We can't talk about it. Heaven
Yeah.
forbid we talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. How were you able to help yourself through the losses and also that part of the journey as well?
Mm. Oh, it was, I think, thinking about the 5 years, for the first couple of years, I don't think I really sought the right support. After the first couple of IVF cycles didn't work, I was like, okay, the realization hit. I was like, okay, this isn't going to be that easy now. I went into it naively thinking it would happen quickly. And so, being the perfectionist, overachiever that I am, I went into doing mode. And I think I actually disconnected from myself. It became almost like a project for me where I just went into survival mode. I was in my head a lot and I was just doing. And so I went through that for a while and I was surviving in that mode for quite some time because I was discovering all these things that I could do, supplements, all the things that would improve my fertility. So for the first maybe year or two, I was in that mode. I was not coping, but I would like a cycle wouldn't work. And then a month or two later, I would do another one. And hence why I've done 13 cycles, because I was just like, okay, let's try again. And then it got to a point where all of my friends were falling pregnant, and I was constantly being surrounded by pregnant people and pregnancy announcements. And that then layered a lot more grief on top of what I was already experiencing. And I think my mental and emotional health then really started to have a huge impact. I started to turn inwards. I used to self isolate to cope. And I knew I needed help. I've been through and experienced a lot of therapy in my history. And I was reaching out to talk therapists through the clinic or through own personal therapists that I knew. And while it was helping to talk through my experiences and the grief, I felt like I was cycling in this state of grief and wasn't actually able to process it. And I felt it was such a unique experience that I don't feel like everyone really understood it. So it was probably like a couple of years into my journey that I came across, I was looking for a fertility coach, and this coach actually also did rapid transformational therapy. And that was the turning point for me. The realization that I think it was slowing down and bring that connection back to myself because I was so out of my body. And like you were saying, the beliefs I had about myself, I convinced myself it probably wasn't going to happen for me. Maybe it wasn't meant to be. And my husband and I were trying to have conversations about all different outcomes, which is the reality of what you're in. But that reinforced some of the beliefs for me. So I was at a very low point. Like I was at a point where I remember getting off the phone after a pregnancy announcement from a close friend, and I walked into the lounge room my husband was, and I just collapsed on the floor crying. And I remember, I don't know how many times I said to him, I can't do this anymore. But I would get back up and I would do it again and I would do something else. And it wasn't until I discovered this fertility coach and rapid transformational therapy, or RTT, that was the change for me, because I was able to then connect in and understand the underlying beliefs that I was sitting with that were holding me back and impacting my mental and emotional health. And I feel like that would, to me, was the turning point where I just started to change the way I was supporting myself, slowing down, not doing more, but actually doing a lot less, and sitting in the grief and actually being able to experience it properly, as opposed to pushing more and pushing it down. So that became the second half of my journey, was really just slowing things down. Didn't mean that it made things easier. It just meant that I was able to sit with things differently and be able to have hope and have grief at the same time, which is a hard juggle.
It is a really hard juggle, but there,
Mm.
like you said, there comes a moment in that all of that doing that you're just like, this isn't actually working for me. Like,
Yeah,
what is this actually doing? And it's potentially causing more stress, more of that. I have just like that self-perpetuating cycle. Like I have to keep doing.
yeah,
I can't stop. And
yeah,
then you get so, so wound up in that it is very difficult to take a step back and step out of that loop and go, okay, this is not working. What else can I
yeah,
do?
yeah.
And a lot of what you said, even with talk therapy, that was one of the things that I found. I saw a psychologist after my
Mm,
experience, and like you said, it's great. There is obviously a place for it, but you do
mm,
end up cycling in your head. And for a lot of
yeah,
the time, I walked away and I was like, I can't actually, there's something missing. And it
yeah,
is that body piece. Like we have to understand because we have disconnected from ourselves. We can't move forward in our healing just cycling in thought patterns and trying to
yeah,
talk ourselves out of,
yeah,
what's actually happening internally.
yeah,
And I love that you mentioned it is about finding that connection back to yourself, but that can be
mm,
scary. That
yeah,
that can feel really unsafe when we're caught in that cycle of doing,
mm,
slowing down and just starting to sit with what's coming up can feel really unsafe.
yeah,
How did you find that for yourself and starting to, because we do have to obviously do that and be there for
yeah.
our healing. You mentioned obviously doing the rapid transformational therapy. How else were you able to connect back? What was that connection process like
Yeah.
for you?
Yeah. And you hit the nail on the head. That was not an easy process. I skimmed over it, but it was a huge chunk of, I think in this space, you're dealing with so much uncertainty, and no psychic, and no psychic told me can tell you exactly when it's going to happen. And it's, but you want to control something that you can't control just to feel safe. And so that letting go of control and the surrendering part was such a gradual process. Yes, RTT helped me, but it was the daily practices. Like when I actually stopped and connected in with my body was so tense, sore, so, everything was tight. No, I think it was doing even just daily practice. I was so scared. I used to do a lot of yoga and I was so scared to do yoga because I was worried about it doing something. That's how much fear I was living in. But coming back to things that I enjoyed was the first thing. Connecting back in with my body, some kind of movement and finding something else. I used to do hot yoga, which I obviously couldn't do, but finding something else that mirrored what I loved and brought that a little bit of joy back into my day. Just that tiny bit of movement was like, it was just really simple things like that. That connection with the body, and I know this sounds cliche, but journaling was actually really good because there was so much in my head and I wasn't actually processing a lot. So doing a lot of that and just trying to, and that was uncomfortable. When you're doing that, sitting with a lot of that grief and trauma that you're experiencing. Some of it was also around just I disconnected from a lot of people and just finding that connection as well, like connecting with friends I hadn't spoken to, just to find that support that I had disconnected from and just enjoying life a little bit. I put my life on hold. I hear this all the time as well now with women that I work with, but we wouldn't go on holidays because I was always like, but we might be doing a cycle then, or I might be pregnant then, or you're thinking ahead. And that's not helpful either because you're just not enjoying life. So doing things and not having to overly plan ahead and just going away on a weekend and just doing things like that actually all those things can create safety because you're just letting go a little bit and you're just in that's connecting back to yourself. I feel that was my experience.
Yeah. And it is because we can, in those moments, we can completely get stuck in like you said, the dates, the checking of your body temperatures, and it becomes a very clinical way of thinking, and we can unintentionally slip into that, and then we
Yeah.
do lose all of the other stuff that we generally did in life prior. So to just be able to stop that hamster wheel and go, you know what,
Yeah.
what is one thing that I can introduce back into my life that could help me just that 1% more.
Yeah.
And journaling was a really big thing for me too, but I think making it really intentional. Like, it's not just
Yeah.
random scribblings. It's okay, I'm going to be sitting with what's coming up. And
Yeah.
for me, that was really beneficial too, because it was a place for my thoughts to be seen and witnessed in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's how, and I remember I journaled out because after my experience, I couldn't physically, I was so emotional. I couldn't physically say all of the things. So I journaled it
Yeah.
all out, and I took it all to my therapist. And I said, here you go, this is what's happening inside of my head.
Yeah.
And then it was just something that I continued doing, but it was very intentional that in how I did it,
Yeah.
it was witnessing, like you said, and
Yeah.
when you allow that space, it is safe for your body. There's nothing unsafe in that experience in terms of external environment, like all of that. And it's just
Yeah.
allowing everything to come through.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it could just be, like you said, finding that one other thing that you could introduce. Like for you, it was yoga, or it could be a walk, or it could just be finally getting out and going for a cup of coffee at a cafe or something, just
Yeah.
completely thinking sort of outside of the box. But it's essentially, like you said, even if it's not the same thing, what is something that mirrored what you enjoyed to do?
Yeah.
I also wanted to touch on like the layered loss in terms of like when you're going through your experience with pregnancy loss, with the IVF cycles, and what, like you spoke about before we started recording, was the embryo loss as well. So it's not just the actual physical miscarriages and pregnancy losses that we're going through. It's also layered in with your IVF cycles. And as soon as we go on these paths, we generally go to the future and we start planning what that's going to look like.
Yeah.
But then when that doesn't happen, it does layer in so much more grief into that experience as well. Did you
Yeah.
want to share a little bit about that too?
Yeah. And I think, yeah, a lot of that grief was the majority of my experience of grieving the timeline that I thought I was going to have, and the way my life I thought was going to pan out. But when you're going through IVF, this stuff, I think actually the part around the loss that you experience with the cycle is what makes people feel so alone, because I don't think people really understand that what is involved in an IVF cycle and how involved it is. So when you're going through it and people I used to get asked a lot about how are you going with the injections? And at the time, that's the least of my worries. I was like, I didn't like it, but you just get on with it. And actually doing the injection part was actually a safer part. It sounds crazy, but you're actually doing something. So you're injecting, you're going to your appointments, you're getting your scans, you're in doing mode. So you're feeling, obviously it's up and down, but you're a bit like, okay, this might actually happen this month. And wow, you go to a scan and you see the follicles and there's eggs going to be in there. So you're so involved, like every second day during that period, you're doing something. And then you go to egg collection. And I didn't get, in my experience, very many eggs. I was lucky to, after egg collection, I would get a decent amount of eggs, but we usually would only end up with one or two. So there's always that at each point in that cycle, let's say across a month, there's hope, and then there's fear coming up and down. That's why I call it the roller coaster. And But at each point, you're constantly thinking, this might work. Or, okay. And then when you go to egg collection and you see those eggs, okay, they're my eggs. And one of these eggs could be my baby. So your thought process throughout all of this is you're connecting in that process with your body in this way, and connecting in with the egg and then the embryo that you get. And that's up to the first 3 weeks of the process. So every month, like, I was holding on to hope every month. There was obviously fear sitting underneath it all, particularly the more cycles I did. But you're so heavily involved and invested in that, financially, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And then when you stop doing, once you get to egg collection and you stop the doing, that's the uncomfortable part of the process, where you have to sit and wait and see what these embryos are going to do in the lab. Are they going to grow? So you're speaking to the lab, and the lab's giving you updates on your embryos. So you're so invested in these little embryos that are growing in a lab that could be one of your babies. And so you start to think, like, in that period, you've got less time, you're doing less. So that was often where I'd be like, okay, if this cycle works, I might be pregnant and might be having a baby at this point. This happened every cycle. So you're planning ahead naturally because you're holding on to that hope. And then you go to embryo transfer, you see the embryo on the screen. Some people I didn't get this, but some people get photos of the embryo that they take home. So you're showing the embryo on the screen, then there's the transfer that happens, and you're watching as they're putting the embryo inside you. So you're watching the whole thing, and then you feel it, you don't feel it, but you know that embryo is then in your body, right? You're very aware that there is something that could be your baby inside your body. And then you've got the 2-week wait, which most people know that is the dreaded 2-week wait, where you have to sit and wait and let nature do its course and see if that embryo will stick. And I found the 2-week wait super hard, but I used to connect in with this embryo and talk to it every day. Every embryo that I had, I would talk to it as if, tell it I was ready for it to connect and to be here. And you do all the things. So you're super connected in at that point. And then you're going for the blood test, a pregnancy test, to see if you are actually pregnant or not. And majority of the time, in my experience, it was a no. 3 times I got, congratulations, you're pregnant, from the clinic. And, that obviously, hearing that, I have videos of those 3 pregnancy phone calls, and I've watched them back, and I can see my face. I don't smile. I don't cry. I crack a little smile, but I can see my face going, don't let go yet. You can't believe this is going to happen. And then in that experiences, then obviously you do the follow-up blood test to check that the pregnancy is tracking. And then my bloods were going down. And then you get that empathetic phone call of, I'm sorry. And it's devastating, because by that point, you've already invested. You get that congratulations, you're pregnant, from the clinic. While I was still holding on, you're still hopeful that, oh, wow, maybe this is it. Maybe this nightmare that I'm in is over and I can finally relax. But then you then get the phone call that you're no longer pregnant. So the investment and the connection that you have to this tiny little embryo is so involved, even by this point. But the loss for me felt quite significant. And the loss is layered, right? It's layered to the connection to this embryo. It's layered with the grief of the time that you thought you would be on. It's all layered on top of. And then there's the unknown of what next. How much longer am I going to be doing this? And there's grief and fear in that too.
It's just like we've said the whole way through, it's very nuanced and it's very layered, isn't it? There is so many points in that. And it's almost like when you get the phone call to say that the pregnancy is non-viable, it would be, for me, it was almost like it was just brought back into my mind. There's no heartbeat. There's just that moment where you're like, your heart just sinks.
Yeah.
And you're like, and you're like, okay, what now? What do I do now? How do I get myself out of this now?
Yeah.
And for the most part, you're just sent away from the clinics. And you'll be like, okay, even through pregnancy loss, you're sent away.
Yeah.
You can try again.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily the case. Like, we need to be given support to process what happened. We need
Yeah.
time, we need space, we need understanding, we need people that can actually hear our fears and doubts and all of that, that we can move forward. We can go into that, okay, let's
Yeah.
try again, whether it is naturally or through IVF. Like, just,
Mm.
but to be given permission to just,
Yeah.
okay, this is big. One in 4 pregnancies will result in miscarriage. 1 in 8 women will experience infertility. 1 in 100 women will experience recurrent miscarriage. And 1 in 160 births end in stillbirth. Have you been wanting to make a difference in the lives of women or men who have experienced pregnancy loss because you can see so many suffering in silence, but you just don't know how? Collectively, we can change how bereaved parents can access mental, physical, and emotional support after their experience. There is a lot of women with unhealed trauma, and there is a huge gap in the current support system when it comes to bereaved parents' recovery after loss. There are too many women and men suffering in silence. The Pregnancy Loss Practitioner Certification is a worldwide, one-of-a-kind program that gives you proven methods designed for healthcare professionals, medical staff, midwives, nurses, doulas, birth workers, coaches, and angel parents alike. The Pregnancy Loss Practitioner Certification is bridging that gap. It will give you a proven support structure to follow and education specific to pregnancy loss, created by a loss mum. It is creating more education specifically for loss so that you can enhance your service and become the point of difference. Or you can create the support that you so desperately needed in your healing after loss. This is the next level of growth and expansion you have been searching for. So does this sound like something that you have been searching for? Let's explore this more together. You can head to the episode show notes where you'll find the program application, or direct message me on Instagram and let's open up the conversation in how you can use this education. You have a gift, and I look forward to supporting you and witnessing you bring your gift to the world, healing and transforming women's lives.
And I found, if I'm being really honest, because my losses happened in an IVF context and they weren't super, like they were relatively early, I actually didn't, I don't think I acknowledged how hard they were at the time. I obviously it was very difficult, but I didn't really think they mattered, if I'm being super, super honest, because when I thought about miscarriage, I thought about people who, it was much later on in the pregnancy. And also, like you're saying, in the IVF process, it was just there's an acknowledgement of the loss, but it was like, okay, now do another cycle. Like you're more likely to fall pregnant if you do a cycle within, I think it was 3 months of this loss. So it just put me straight back into, okay, go into doing mode. Okay, what are we going to do next? So it gave me a little bit of hope, but it also switched on that doing mode that the first 2 losses, I definitely was like that. The last loss, I definitely allowed myself to really process that. But yeah, there isn't any space for it. And even there's like counselors through IVF clinics. But again, that's talk therapy. And I don't know if it was a really challenging time when I reflect back on how much I probably didn't really process it effectively and wasn't really given the space to do that and didn't really know where to go to actually work through that rather than just moving on and being told that try again. That's going to help. And it didn't in my case.
No, and you'd know with your work that you do too, with all this, the nervous system
Mm,
dysregulation that we go through in these moments, then when there's this event that we go through, and then without that support afterwards, our body starts to switch gears. And it's,
mm,
I don't actually think pregnancy is going to be safe for you now.
yeah.
And again, it's just our body's way of protecting. Like, it's survival
Yeah.
instinct. It's
Yeah.
basically how we're wired. And the more we get exposed to these situations and experiences where we're not seen, we're not given the support that we need, our body starts to hold more fear, more doubt, more
Yeah.
stress, more all of it. It starts to turn things off.
Yeah.
And we want to fall pregnant. We want to have a baby. That's
Yeah.
the goal. That's why you're doing all of that.
Yeah.
But then your body starts working in a way that's not supportive of that, because it's
Yeah.
no, this is actually causing you more stress. And stress doesn't equal a good environment for a newborn, like in your body's
Yeah. Yeah.
eyes.
Yeah.
So the fact that we don't have the support, especially like you said, even fertility clinics, they offer the counseling. And I've heard this before from other women that I've spoken to as well. Like, it was all talk therapy, but it felt a little bit one-sided. It was more like, okay, you're going to their therapist in the hopes that maybe it's just helping you move through whatever's going on right now so that you can go into another cycle.
Yeah.
Whereas we actually do, I feel like it needs to go deeper than that. I feel like it does need to have added layers of body witnessing what is happening in our body,
Yeah.
like the
Yeah.
somatic practices, like
Yeah.
actually hearing and being able to sit with and create space for what's coming up.
Yeah.
I feel like that's just something that's not acknowledged. Yes, we can
Yeah.
talk it. We can talk. And that's what I did. I talked and talked for years,
Yeah.
but my body was
Yeah.
still in fight and flight. I'm like,
Yeah.
what is happening?
Yeah.
Why am I still having panic attacks? Why am I still feeling this way?
Yeah.
And for years, I didn't understand what it was, because I was never given the support or awareness that I needed to have at the time to help me process through that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like that's just, I don't know, I feel like it's just something that's missing in that space.
Totally. And I think I said it earlier that talk therapy is amazing and it has its
Mm.
space, but it kept me in my head. So I always do a bit of a analogy of I was so in my head and I was so disconnected from my body. And what you actually need is that full mind body connection to feel into where that grief and fear and uncertainty and everything is feeling and sitting. I'm just lucky that I came across RTT and was able to really tap into that mind body connection, because otherwise I just would have been swirling in my head and staying in that survival fight or flight mode, which is completely where I was at.
Mm.
Yeah, and it's such a missing piece. I get so passionate talking about this because it's such a missing piece. It's something that's so important to not just talk through things over and over again. Like, it's a bit more layered than that.
And with your story, there was an added layer of grief too, with
Mm.
not being able to choosing the egg donation
Yeah,
and having to also then surrender that part of your, like you said, your genetics, the fact that it is someone else's egg. And
yeah,
also there is that so much grief that would be layered in there that also isn't given enough awareness to or supported
yeah,
enough.
yeah.
Um, because you often hear about people talking about there's grief when you change jobs, there's grief when you
Mm.
do all of these other life things.
Yeah,
But this is so personal and such a
yeah,
big journey, and they're big decisions that have to be made. And there's a lot of
yeah,
grief that's attached to them.
yeah.
How were you able to navigate that?
Oh, that was a long process because donor egg was mentioned to us like halfway through our journey, and I was shutting it down. I was in that fight or flight mode. I was like, no, no way, that's not my story. I'm not going there. I knew I wanted to be a mum. I knew I was going to be a mum. And eventually I very subtly just joined like donor egg Facebook groups and just sat and watched. I didn't do anything. I just had joined them and saw them come up in my feed and just processed it a little bit. I did a lot of talk therapy on what it would look like. And I was just shutting it down for a good year or two. And it was in this process of really starting to connect back into myself and slowing down that I had to start to reflect on what was I doing? Like I'm holding on to something that's not working. I'm doing the same thing over and over again, and something's not working for us. And I always say this, my biggest lesson on my fertility journey was surrender. And I was holding on so tightly to what I thought my vision of what I wanted was going to be. And my parents are Irish, so I was for some reason, I was so fixated on having my own genetic kids to pass on that heritage. Like it was something that one of many things that I was like, no, I'm not letting go of that. Obviously, this was a big conversation between my husband and I, who was struggling. And we don't talk about partners a lot either, is they go through their own grief. He was watching me become a shell of myself, a very different person. And so it was an ongoing conversation of, okay, the last year of doing IVF, we had massive breaks in between. I think we did 6 months in between, which was big for me. And in that time, I started to explore egg donation and just sit with the uncomfortable feeling of what would it look like to not have my own kids that might not look like me, kids that might not have my genetics. And yeah, I just did a lot of research and just sitting and processing, like we were talking, a lot of journaling, a lot of kind of just reflection. And because we did 13 cycles, I often used to say to my husband after a cycle didn't work, just one more. And he would be like, when are you going to stop saying just one more? Because I just kept thinking the next one's going to work. So we ended up making an agreement to do a goodbye cycle with my eggs. And we agreed that no matter what happened with that cycle, that was it, no more. And that cycle ended in a pregnancy loss. So that was really heartbreaking and was the furthest along I'd been. And it was hard for me to let go. Like that, there's a part of me switching on going, this is the furthest I've got. But yeah, I remember that 2-week wait really vividly in that cycle of, there was some part of me that was coming forward going, okay, be prepared to go through donor eggs if this doesn't work. And of course, it ended in a loss. And then it was after that, we then went through the whole egg donation process, which, is very long. And it was a little bit scary because there's also another outcome of you don't know if you're going to find a donor or how long that's going to take, because I was told it could take a long time. We might have to go overseas and that's really expensive. We were very lucky that wasn't the case for us. It was such a long process of working through so many fears that I had about what that would mean for our future kids. Like, what would that mean for them in their story of how they came into this world, and how is that too complex for them? There was all of that. I was worrying about so many there's a loss of my genetics, but I was worrying about them, these children that I didn't know yet. It was such a long process. But yeah, and obviously I look back on that now, and my experience of it now with my beautiful children here is very different to the fears that I had then, but you don't know that. And I had to work through that myself to get to that place of surrender and acceptance.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We don't know the future, what the future holds. We can't predict the future, and we try so hard sometimes to predict what it's going to do, what we're going to be doing, what it's going to look like, what it's going to feel like. And this is where we can cause ourselves so much more grief, more harm, because we're living in that end outcome essentially that doesn't exist. The only thing that we can do is support ourselves in this moment right now.
Yeah.
Can't change what happened in the past. We can't change what's coming in the future. The only thing we can do, we can start to shape how our future will look by how we are in this moment and what we choose to do in this moment. But it is very difficult to rein those thoughts back in, because essentially what our body is doing is putting us into protective mode. Like, no, the future's uncertain. There's potential threats. So let's just stay here. We know it here. It's safe here. Let's not entertain that future, but you want it so much. You want that outcome. You want your children. You want to know how it could all potentially unfold. But then, you know, parenting after going through all of the things that you went through then just brings its own set of unique challenges and experiences as well. Because you know what it's taken for you to get them. And then you have still then all of the fears and worries and stresses just shift and change, because then you're like, okay, they're here now. Now I have to keep them alive, and I don't want them to I don't want them to ever leave my side. But again, we can't, and as much as we want to, that I think, like you said, surrender is the thing that in so many journeys we have to become really comfortable with that feeling of surrender. But it's not even, it's becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable. Like, it's not even that you're oh yes, I'm sweet to surrender. It's not that at all. Like, it's just that you know that this is what needs to happen. And for yourself, for your healing, for you to be able to move forward.
Absolutely. I remember I used to ask my RTT therapist and my coach, she used to talk to me a lot about surrender. And I used to say to her, how do I surrender? How do you surrender on an IVF journey when you're so involved in it? Like, it used to be an ongoing conversation. I think back to it now, but it isn't just like letting go and going, okay, sweet, universe. But it isn't that. It's tiny little micro movements of just sitting with that uncomfortable and a little bit of acceptance. Like, it's not as what everyone thinks, I'll just let go. It's a lot more nuanced than that. But yeah, it was. But also, I think you just touched on something. I think I struggled to, this sounds really crazy, but moving on to donor eggs was also a new thing for me. And while I was really struggling on my journey and going through IVF, there was this bizarre safety in the IVF world. I was in it and I knew the process and I knew what was next. I knew how a cycle worked. And there was some bizarre safety in that because I understood it so well that I also had to let go of that chapter and enter a new one that was very different and a different process. Like there's so that's what, and we talk about this being layered. That is a really bizarre thing, but there was something in that too for me that I had to surrender into a new process, new path.
Absolutely. It was obviously the IVF journey was new to you at the beginning, but then you became so familiar with it. And then there was this process that you'd also set up for yourself of let's do this. And then I guess it's that sense of, like you said, safety. There's also that part of control as well. You know it there, what decisions you have to make, and letting go and having to let go of that, as much as it wasn't serving you in the end, again, is another added layer of your journey and also the grief. Like, you've had to let go of something that didn't work. It didn't offer you the vision that you had for yourself. And I think sometimes we do need to remind ourselves that we can do hard things, because at each of the start of everything, we don't know what it's like going into that thing. We learn, we grow, we adapt, and then that thing ends, and then we have to go again. But we're never starting with, like, we start knowing nothing, but we're capable of learning. We're capable of growing into that next chapter, that next thing. It's just freaking scary because you're starting at the bottom. Like, you don't know what that holds, what decisions you have to make. You don't know what's expected of you. And to entertain the thought of egg donation when for so long you've been pushing it away.
Yeah.
But it ended up being the thing that worked for you.
Yeah. And the irony is once I really, after that last IVF cycle with my own eggs, I remember just saying, okay, universe, I've let that go. Over to you now. I actually surrender this time, like what's next kind of thing. And I remember actually saying that out loud once because I was like, okay, I remember once I did that, I remember the feeling in my body of I just loosened up. There was just this bizarre shift. And there's some power in that because once I feel like I did that, things started to flow because I wasn't controlling things. Like everything just started to flow a bit more easily in that space as it can be, as much as it was still hard. Yeah, so that just letting go was spiritually and emotionally a big move for me, but it took a while to get there.
Yeah. It doesn't
Yeah,
happen just on a whim where
yeah,
it's one day you're like, no, that's okay, I'm done. But
yeah,
it's it is a it's something that you do have to work yourself up to. And there's been a couple of moments in my journey where I've said that too. You're holding so much weight of everything. You're holding, like you
mm,
said, everything's so tight. And then you realize you're like, oh, I can't do this. Why? Even it's a slow and gradual process, but then you end
yeah,
up like everything, your muscles are tight, everything's
yeah,
tight. And you just get to a point where you're like, I can't do that anymore. And you do,
mm,
it's this, and I've said it out loud as well myself. And it's almost just in that vocal that
yeah,
just, oh, and you feel this sense of release. And
yeah,
it doesn't, it's not just a magical thing. You do have to believe what you're doing. You are handing over the things that you can't control. We
mm,
can't hold on to those.
yeah,
That's not serving us. So everything, when you
yeah,
choose to surrender, it's going, okay, here you go. I don't need this anymore. I can't control this.
yeah,
So you can ask for help in that moment too.
yeah,
I need support. I need help
yeah,
in being able to continue to move through with this.
yeah,
There's a lot of power in that, but it's not something that you just wake up and
yeah,
do one
yeah,
day.
yeah. Hence why I kept asking my therapist, what do you mean, Serena? What does that look like? That was the part of the process of letting go of needing to intellectualize it too.
Yes. Yeah, it's such a human thing to do though, is to try to rationalize it in our brain. Okay, so this is the steps that I have to do.
Yeah, I needed her to almost map it out. And she's going to the cough, sorry.
Yeah.
She was, she obviously knew what she was doing. She's like letting me just process it because there was no map to surrender. It's so individual to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
So her theory was, I'll just let Jules like work it
Yeah,
out for herself
yeah,
in her own way.
yeah,
Talk yourself around.
yeah,
But it is something that we arrive to. It's not just something that one day we just like, yeah, it is just that one day where you're like, I'm surrendering, but it takes a lot of
yeah,
emotional, energetic work to get to that point.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And also belief work, because if you want to surrender what's happening, but you're not actually on board, like your body's not on board with
Yeah,
it, then you're just going to sabotage like all of the things that come after anyway.
yeah, yeah,
It could be liberating and empowering, but it could also be that you still ended up in the same patterns because
yeah,
of all that sort of pre-work.
yeah. And that's like obviously where I found RTT really helpful. And what I do now is working with the subconscious and those underlying beliefs that while intellectually in your conscious mind, you're like, yeah, okay, I'm going to surrender. And there's this other subconscious going, no way, like we've created all of this now. You're not going anywhere. So it's bringing that together and clearing some of those unhelpful beliefs.
Yes,
to bring it to the forefront.
absolutely. 'Cause is it like 5% conscious, 95% unconscious? So really our thinking, rational, cognitive processes aren't doing that
Mm.
much. They can tell us
No,
what we want to hear, but it's all of that underlying things that is actually communicating to everything, every other part,
everything else.
every other
Yeah,
part of our body. No,
yeah,
that's not what you're going to be doing. You might tell
yeah,
yourself that's what you'll do.
yeah,
So on that note, do you want to share what you do, how people can find you?
yeah. So I'm a rapid transformational therapy practitioner and hypnotherapist, and I also do nervous system and somatic work as well. And I help women at all stages of their fertility journey work through the uncomfortable feelings that are coming up, the fear, the grief, the loss that they're experiencing, embryo loss, pregnancy loss, any other type of loss that they're experiencing, and be able to process it, work with the subconscious to let go of some of those patterns that might be sitting underneath that are creating that fear and creating that your mind and your body to be sitting in survival mode. So do a lot of work in that space, and I help people in through pregnancy and into motherhood as well, because it doesn't just stop sometimes with the two pink lines. As we know, there's a lot more nuance to it than that. So they can find me on Instagram. My handle is Jules Dwyer _.
Yeah, amazing. And I'll make sure that it's all linked in the show notes as well, so people can find you and they can reach out to you. But I do encourage anyone who is obviously in this path, like if there's something that has been said today that you resonate with, in your healing journey, we do need to start to really understand what's happening internally and to really start to break through for yourself. That's what happened. It was the shift that worked for you. It was the shift that worked for me. Sometimes it's not necessary, but the most part for most women that I've spoken with, including myself, working with the subconscious, working with the nervous system in our healing after loss is so valuable.
Yeah.
So, yeah, if anything has resonated, I invite you to reach out to Jules. Just open up a conversation and see where that goes. But I appreciate you, Jules, for coming on to the podcast today.
Thank you for having me and letting me share my story. I really appreciate it.
You're so welcome. You have a lot of value in your story. So I hope the listeners I know they'll walk away with something.
Yeah.
Thank you to all that have listened in. If this episode was valuable to you, I invite you to leave a review on Apple Podcasts, and I look forward to supporting you on the next episode. Thank you for listening in with me today. I hope you found this episode helpful. If you did, I would absolutely love to hear from you. Take a screenshot of this episode, share it to social media, and tag me at Institute of Healing _PL. I love seeing what is resonating with you right now. If you want to chat further, I invite you to connect with me through Instagram. Head over and follow my Instagram account, send me a DM, and let's open the communication. If you want to know more about how you can be the support for others, head to the show notes and fill out the application form for the Pregnancy Loss Practitioner certification. I want to also note here that what I share within the episodes is not medical advice. If you need further support, please consult your doctor. Thank you again. Much love to you. Be gentle with yourself, and I look forward to supporting you on the next episode.